It's great to be here. I've been very honored to be your guest every year or two since I took the Recovery School District job in 2011, nearly 8 years ago, and have been blessed every day to be able to do this job, and very blessed to come back to the Press Club, so thank you very much for having me. I'm a little under the weather, so I might duck out and take a drink of water as we go. My daughter, I have a native Louisianan in my family. As has been noted, I'm not a native Louisianan. We'll get that out of the way. But my daughter is a native Louisianan. Unfortunately, she came down with a cold last week, and her first cold, and I came down with her cold later. So you'll forgive me if I take a drink of water. I want to talk a little bit about the last 7 to 8 years and what's been accomplished. I want to talk a little bit about what remains to be accomplished and what our challenges are in Louisiana. And most important, I want to talk about the budget and the upcoming legislative session, and in light of those two things. So I'm not here to analyze the budget for the budget's sake. I want to talk about the budget in light of what remains to be accomplished in Louisiana's education system and what our greatest opportunities and challenges are. I will say that the last 7 to 8 years have been very much in the media, taken up with issues like school choice, like academic standards. But our business is not so complicated as the headlines may make it out to be sometimes. For all the talk about charter schools versus private schools versus traditional schools and such, our business is proven day in and day out to work in some places and not work in other places. And so when you do a job like mine, what you have to do is look at the places where it's working and try to do what they're doing. And we have spent the last 8 years looking around the world and looking around our country at what the most successful education systems do and trying to replicate it. And for us, that's meant 5 very, very simple things, and it's, as John mentioned, wrapped up in our plan Louisiana Believes. First, our country and our state have a badly fragmented early childhood education system. Head Start, child care, private pre-K, public pre-K, all different rules, all different governing agencies, all different models. Well, in 2012, Louisiana began to bring it into one system, and we are singular among states for having successfully unified Head Start, child care, public pre-K, and private pre-K into one system of funding, of quality ratings, of curriculum, and of teacher training, unifying the system of early childhood care and education. Second, for all the talk about standards and accountability and standardized tests, teachers in America today, still too often, don't have a curriculum that teaches their kids what the standards tell them it should teach, don't have tests that measure what the curriculum actually says, and aren't trained to teach the curriculum that they use in the first place. Louisiana has done more than any state in the country to ensure that there is a quality curriculum in every classroom, that there's a test that measures the skills that are embodied in that curriculum, and that teachers are trained to teach the skills embedded within those curriculum. Third, teacher training in America is badly out of touch with the realities of practice in the classroom. Louisiana is a national leader and one of only 2 states in the country where now every undergraduate education aspiring teacher does the senior year of high school in the classroom under the tutelage of a veteran educator, not unlike a nurse, not unlike a doctor or an architect or any venerated profession in our society. They train under the tutelage of a mentor educator. Fourth, we have revitalized the dignity and ended the stigma against the career and technical education system. We have recognized that, as valid as it is, a 4-year university degree is not the only path to success, and that across the tens of thousands of kids who graduate from Louisiana's high schools every year, the important thing is to assure that there is a pathway to prosperity, whether it goes through a community college, a coding boot camp, a craft trades training shop, or LSU and Southern. What's important is that there is a pathway to prosperity, and the career and technical education system is a vital part of that, and we have revitalized the career and technical education system. And fifth and finally, by all means necessary, we have focused relentlessly on students who are consigned to persistently struggling schools. No family, wants to wake up any day and send their child to a school rated D or F. It is particularly tragic for low-income parents, too often parents of color, who live in neighborhoods that are exclusively made up of low-income residents and families. And so we have expanded school choice. We've expanded charter schooling, the New Orleans Recovery School District model, the Baton Rouge Achievement School District model. But most importantly and most relevant for most families, our Every Student Succeeds Act plan, which works directly with the traditional public schools to assure that their teachers are trained well and that they have a high-quality curriculum in front of every child. It doesn't matter whether it's a non-public school, a traditional public school, or a charter public school. We have got to end the scourge of persistently failing schools for low-income families by all means necessary. Have we seen results from this? Well, John talked a little bit about it, but I would say this. Under any commonly accepted measure, the population coming out of today's high schools in Louisiana is better educated than was the population 8 years ago. We graduated more students at a higher rate from high school last year than at any point in the history of the state of Louisiana. Of those graduates, 7,000 more in that class graduated with a college-going ACT score than did in the class of 2012. We have nearly tripled the number of graduates who graduate with an advanced placement credential. We led the nation in the number of graduates who graduate with a CLEP test that allows them a college credit moving on into a 2 or a 4-year institution. Louisiana has a higher percentage of its students that apply for federal aid to go on to college, 2 or 4 year, or to workforce training than any state in the nation. And TOPS recipients have increased from 16,000 per graduating class to 19,200 per graduating class. People want to talk about the escalating cost of TOPS, but a lot of the escalating TOPS is a good thing because more kids are qualifying for TOPS, because more kids are doing well academically, getting higher ACT scores, and are interested in going on to college. In fact, this year's graduating class, 23,000 went on to enroll the following fall in a 2 or a 4-year institution, the highest number in the state's history. And we've moved from 1% of graduates earning an industry-valued credential to 24% graduating with an industry-based credential. By any measure, the opportunities that are available to adolescents graduating from our high school system and moving on into adult life today are greater than they were, not just generations past, but in recent years past. We have a better educated population in Louisiana, greater economic opportunity for our people because of the changes that have been instituted over the last decade in Louisiana's public education system. And yet, and here's where the budget gets so important, Louisiana still faces grave, grave educational challenges. And it is worth reminding ourselves that still today in a state that struggles with youth unemployment, still today in a state that struggles with basic rates of literacy, still today in a state that struggles with poverty, still today in a state trying to address the injustices that have so characterized its past, we have deep educational challenges. While 90% of 4-year-olds who qualify for a state pre-K program or a child care program are served, only 30% of eligible 3-year-olds are able to attend a child care program or a Head Start program. Of infants and toddlers, only 7%. And so right from the get-go, if we're talking about giving mom and dad a leg up, making sure that a young child is in the hands of a professionally qualified caretaker, 7% infants and toddlers, 30% of 3-year-olds, a deplorably low amount of opportunity. We've talked a lot about the percentage of teachers who are qualified and prepared in their subject areas, and there have been numbers thrown about. And there are places in our state where every teacher virtually is qualified in their subject area. St. Tammany Parish, only 0.3% of teachers are not qualified to teach in their subject area. In East Feliciana Parish, 33%. In Grant Parish, a quarter of all teachers not prepared, not qualified to teach in their subject area. And then we wonder why basic reading, math, social studies, and science scores in Louisiana are so low relative to peers across the country. I'll talk a little bit later about teacher pay raises, but we first need to look at when we bring people into our profession, how well are we retaining them? 43% of teachers in our state in any given year who are in their first 5 years of service will leave their job at the end of that year. And it is that fact that is driving what is happening in our rural communities. The churn of people in and out of our classrooms, in and out of the lives of our kids, and the academic results that we see on the other side. And finally, at the end of our system, we have more kids going to college, we have more industry-based credentials than ever before, but we still struggle with a simple fact. Are our kids completing college, and are our kids getting good jobs? And while the answer is maybe to a greater extent, the answer is still not nearly enough. Louisiana ranks 50th in the nation in terms of the young adults between the ages of 16 and 24 who are neither enrolled in an institution of higher learning nor employed full-time. That is the cycle of poverty made manifest in our state every day, and it needs to change. And so the question going forward is, how does it change? We've seen some successes, but we're still dealing with the demons of our past. How does it change? And over the 8 years that I've been in this job, I've kind of developed the hypothesis that the states that are going to compete, the states that are going to dig themselves out of this, the states that are going to be viable, not just in dealing with the issues of today's economy, but with the fact that even the jobs that we want to put kids in today are going to so vastly change within 5 or 10 years. The states that are going to be competitive in that environment are going to be the states that don't view themselves as having, we got some nice pre-K programs over here, we got some elementary and high schools over here, we got some colleges over here, we got an adult education system over there. They're going to view their education systems as seamless, as places that start when infants are born and that go through retirement, and that allow low-cost on-ramps and off-ramps so that any point in an individual's life, they can use the public education system to access opportunity, to mobilize, to upskill, and to change their trajectory. Those are the states that will compete, not the states that accept the old school, fragmented way of thinking about the education system as 4 different systems: an early childhood system, an elementary and secondary system, a college system, and an adult system. And there are some great things in this year's budget that do take us forward. There are things in what's been proposed that I support wholeheartedly. But our budget does not take us to that place, and our policies do not take us to that place. And it's worth unpacking the budget to talk a little bit about what's in there and how it could do more to get us to that place. The issue that's on everybody's mind, of course, is the pay increase. And I want to talk a little bit about what's in the budget from a K-12 education perspective, what role the pay increase plays in that, and what role the rest of it entails. The governor has proposed in the budget, and Bessie would need to adopt and make it real, a $1,000 per certificated educator, teachers, principals, assistant principals, coaches, counselors, $1,000 for each of those individuals, and a little bit extra to cover their residual pension obligations that increase when their salaries increase. He's also proposed $500 for support workers, bus drivers, janitors, and a little bit extra for their residual pension obligations. The certificated staff cost $75 million. The non-certificated support staff cost $26 million, a total investment of $101 million, well beyond any increase that the MFP has seen in the last decade. And I support it. I appreciate the governor putting it on the table. I appreciate him raising the issue, and I appreciate him honoring our educators and our support staff. That is not all, however, that's in the budget. What also is in the budget is an additional $40 million for school boards, a 1.375% increase in the base rate per pupil cost within the MFP. Also in the budget, an increase for the Office of Juvenile Justice. Also in the budget, an increase in TOPS. Also in the budget, an increase in corrections, an increase for higher education. So what is not in the budget? What is not in the budget is a direct contribution to supporting our teachers and to retaining them. In fact, the Department of Education staff under this budget uniquely is cut by 41 people who work on curriculum and support matters on a day-to-day basis. What is not in the budget, thinking of the seamless system of education for our state to compete, is increased funding for the opportunity for young people to pursue early career training or early college courses so that they can advance their attainment through dual enrollment courses, through AP courses, while they're in high school, and so that their parents can take down the cost of college. And we can take college from being a 4-year experience to a 3-year experience, or a 2-year experience to a 1-year experience. There is not that investment in the budget. But I think most cruelly and most unfortunately, there is zero money of any increase of any size for one part of the education system, uniquely, and that is the early childhood part of the education system. We have 3,300 families today sitting on a wait list in my office. Absent federal subsidies that my department has pursued on its own, and soon, without those federal subsidies, if they do not return this year, that number on the wait list will be 9,800. Child care has been cut under the Jindal administration from 40,000 children enrolled to 15,000 today. There has been no increase in LA4 funding, and there is no increase at the federal level to Head Start. There is no increase to private pre-K in this budget. Put simply, in spite of all of the bipartisan rhetoric supporting advances in early childhood education, in spite of the extremely palpable and tragic presence of a wait list for working families. These are not families sitting at home. These are working moms and dads who are waiting to go to work, waiting to find a safe educational place for their child. This budget does not include a dime. Fortunately, we're at the start of a process. Bessie has to consider the money that the governor has put in the budget and has to make decisions about the pay raise and has to make decisions about the additional $40 million for school boards. The legislature needs to ultimately take up whatever MFP the board sends across the street, and the legislature needs to take up every other piece of what I've outlined here today along with the rest of the budget. So we're at the outset. And clearly there are fiscal debates and circumstances that are well beyond my purview and well beyond the scope of our discussion today. But I hope the legislature will recognize that those states that are going to provide lifelong opportunity for their young people cannot afford to segment the allocation of opportunity. They cannot afford to simply say, well, kids at certain ages or teachers at certain ages. Remember, LA4 teachers didn't get a raise. Child care teachers didn't get a raise. Private pre-K teachers didn't get a raise. Head Start teachers didn't get a raise. We cannot afford to segment opportunity, to cloister opportunity, and to leave some kids out if we're going to have an education system that competes. I appreciate greatly the steps that have been made in this budget toward getting our teachers back to where they need to be, and I will wholeheartedly support it at every stage of the process. But as we look at the rest of the resources in this $30 billion budget, I implore our legislature to please look at our youngest learners, look at their teachers, look at their families trying to go to work, and ask what we can do for them as well. I thank you so much for the chance to come back, to talk about our kids, to talk about our schools, talk about our teachers. It's a great blessing to do this job every day, and it's a great blessing to be able to come and share my thoughts with you. I'll look forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
Superintendent White.
Yes, sir.
House Republicans have said that they would not support a teacher pay raise on grounds that was not sustainable. What would you do, or if anything, would you do to go to bat for teachers in that regard, in light of what they're saying?
The question is that House Republicans have said it's not sustainable, and what will I do to go to bat for them? Well, I'll just say plain and simple, I mean, there's every bit of evidence to show that if we can't compete for teacher talent, we're going to have further problems than what we already have in terms of attracting and retaining our teachers. But I will say this, and there was an article in The Advocate last week that I thought skirted over this fact, not by will. We have an attracting talent problem. We have a keeping talent problem. I'm sorry, 43% retention of all teachers in their first 5 years on an annual basis, or 43% attrition, is devastating. And when you hear that it affects places in such disproportionate ways, we have to ask ourselves not just what's the base rate of compensation, which is important, and I will continue to advocate that it go up, but also that we're doing everything we can, a professional system of support for those individuals in every school. And if we had that, I can say that 43% would not be nearly as high. Yes, sir.
Superintendent, so there's a proposal, hasn't yet been drafted, but a bill proposed by Senator Denny Martley that would legalize sports betting and pretty much incorporate a lot of that revenue into early education programs. Is that something, firstly, that you would support? Secondly, something that you think would put an effective dent in these kinds of programs?
So let's talk about the sports gambling. Sorry. Yep. Good enough. The question is that Senator Martini is proposing a piece of legislation to allow sports gambling to be legal in the state. And there has been talk of it contributing to early childhood education and so on. So let's talk about how the sports gambling revenues could contribute to early childhood education. Well, first, you'd have to get the statute or the resolution passed by a 2/3 majority. And my observation of the politics is not that it's evident in everyone's mind that this is a good thing in the first place, wherever I stand on it. So it's got to get through a 2/3 majority in both chambers. Then it's got to go out to a by-parish vote of the people. And gambling revenue in New Orleans is a wholly different thing from gambling revenue in East Carroll. So it affects different parishes differently because a simple majority of parish residents and voters have to vote to approve both. Then you'd have to have some way in all of this of dedicating some part of it to early childhood education, and then you'd have to have some way of figuring out how much does the amount of money actually generate toward the problem, and then you'd have to figure out, knowing that the amount of money will be so disproportionate place to place, how do you make it fair? Relative to simply doing what happened for corrections, what happened for the K-12 teachers, what happened for the K-12 school boards, what happened for the Board of Regents, what happened to TOPS, which is putting a line in the budget that just increases support for those families. This is the only one of those things that has a wait list. TOPS doesn't have a wait list. So why does the one service for the poorest working families in Louisiana that has a wait list not get the wait list cleared in this year's budget? I don't understand it. And I appreciate the discussion about dedicating those revenues, but for families sitting on a wait list, the process that I just outlined is a lot of faith to have to show while you have to wait at home with your kid every day before you can go to work. Yes, Julie.
So could you be more specific about how much money you think is needed for early childhood education? And then the other question I had is, right now you say that the budget has this pay raise in it, the governor's proposal, but we're having this fight over REC and whether that money has been recognized or not. And I'm curious about whether you think that makes educators nervous that there's this fight over the money that essentially would be used to fund their pay raise.
So the question is, the second question was, does the financial environment and the debate between House Republicans and the other members of the Revenue Estimating Conference have some bearing on the way that teachers feel about this? The first question is, how much money would it actually take for early childhood education? On the second one, I don't know, and I wouldn't even speculate. I believe that the governor, by increasing the base rate per pupil and suggesting that, is doing something that Bessie will support. I know he's doing something that superintendents around the state support. If you need evidence of that, look at West Baton Rouge, which just increased by $5,000 per teacher. Jefferson Parish has a millage out, increased by $5,000. Claiborne Parish just increased by $5,000. So there's local energy on this too. On the first question, there is a bipartisan task force that just wrapped up its work on early childhood education. And they proposed an $800 million cumulative investment, starting with $80 million this year, and then asking for a commitment from the state for effectively an additional $80 million every year henceforth. That was the starting point in a discussion. I think fair to say they gave an ambitious financial vision. And frankly, when you're starting at zero, and not just zero this year, but zero for a decade, your expectation for what is good might not have to be 80 million. It might be something short of 80 million. But it's got to be something that's meaningful. And what would be a meaningful first step? Well, there's 3,300 families on the wait list right now. That's $15 to $20 million. If we don't get the additional federal windfall this year that we got last year, we get to 10,000 families nearly that are on the wait list. Well, that's $50 million. So I think that what we do should be anchored in the real reality that people are facing in our communities. And the wait list is the best representation we have of that.
John, you talked about looking at other places where following something that succeeds and sort of best practices, if you will. How many other states fully fund early childhood? I know LA4 was unique when it was first kicked off. Does somebody have a comprehensive plan that you can point to?
I think there are states. I think there are states like Maryland, West Virginia, that have tried to do what we've done, which is to try to unify the governing model. And I do think this is an issue where Democrats too often kind of are leaning in on universal pre-K and are ignoring the role that Head Start, child care, and private pre-Ks play. And on the other hand, maybe people on the other side of the aisle haven't been able to step up and see past some of the fiscal constraints. So I don't know that there is a place that has fully funded an ambitious vision, but there are states that have worked with us over the years, and Maryland and West Virginia would be too, in trying to make the most of all resources that are available to unify them. I'll just give you one other case in study that's worth looking at, and that's Utah. And I think I hear often in the legislature, and we both spend time there, that what about families who want to stay home with their kids? How are they thought of in the system? And one thing that's worth looking at Utah for is how well they've supported financially and invested in support services for moms and dads who wish to stay home with their children and provide them child care services as well. Utah, having such a large remote population, has really invested in that as well. So I don't know there's any state that's gotten it perfect. DC, Washington, D.C. is the municipality that has the greatest level of investment and probably is the closest to something you could call a fully funded model. But that's a different context, and I don't think that they've made the best of every resource either. So there's different models out there. We just need to start taking sensible steps to provide opportunity for working families.
One follow-up on the $1,000. There's been some discussion that it shouldn't be across the board, that maybe higher amounts for high-need science or physics or something, as opposed to everybody getting $1,000. What's the question?
The question is, there's been some talk about it about rather than across the board, not being based on science and this and that. I think there's merit in looking at that. There are your laws that require that local school boards do a lot of that, and frankly, local school boards have a lot of those systems in place. It's still going to be local school boards that have so much of the discretion as to how people get paid. The state chipping in $1,000 per teacher is a good boost for what are effectively local efforts, and locals can do just that. Louis?
Under the state's industrial tax exemption, we're one of the only states that allow exemptions for school taxes. And the loss of revenue to local school boards, how does that affect the total education system?
Obviously, we're seeing those policies play out. I think once we see the round of ITEP decisions at a local level, we'll be able to calculate, how have the local decisions and the shift toward more local authority on that issue ultimately affect the financial bottom line. And on the issue of does the exemption as a condition affect overall investment in education, I do not know the answer to that and don't have a comparison for it.
John, did you ask the Edwards administration to include money in the budget on the waiting list? Or do you know why there's no money in
The question is, did I ask the Edwards administration to include money for the waiting list, and has there been a dialogue on that? It's no secret to anyone that I have been advocating for more money for early childhood education since effectively Act 3 started. I mean, Act 3 has been one of the most bipartisan, successful pieces of legislation I have ever heard of, much less had the privilege to work on. From its inception, local child care, school boards, superintendents, private schools, Head Starts, got around a table in every parish in the state and implemented the law. And the legislature has not stepped up with a dime of funding. And this budget continues that. The only thing that's grown is demand for the service, because when the service got better, more parents wanted it. And we started stemming the tide of the cuts. And so we've tried to fill the gap with federal revenue, and everybody celebrates there's more federal revenue, and that's great. But the state has not stepped up. I don't believe that my position on that is a secret to the administration or anyone else. Barbara?
John, what's been done to incentivize schools in the accountability system to do more technical and career training and have more certifications?
Well, Louisiana was really a pioneer. Only Louisiana and Kentucky what's been done to incent, I'm just terrified up here. What's been done to, don't worry, your position is understood. The question is, what's been done in the accountability system to incent the career and technical credentials? Really, Louisiana and Kentucky are the only systems in the country where students, if they achieve, say, an advanced placement test passage, the highest rate of university preparation, receive a bonus for their school that's commensurate with students that get an NCCR Level 2 welding credential, or a Cisco Systems Administration credential, or a Google programming credential. That's the basis of our high school accountability system, is not just getting a diploma, but strengthening it with additional credentials. And we value AP, IB, CLEP, the classic academic credentials, alongside the industry-based credentials, not one greater than the other. Lanny?
Could I follow up on that? Is it easy to get a full Cisco or other credential? Aren't a lot of those credentials only available to students after they get out of high school and are able to complete some post-graduate training, or are there a number of...
No, actually, Ascension Parish has 200 kids every day on Highland Road at ABC. They go 4 or 5 days a week, half the day for 2 years, and they come out as level 2 electricians, pipe fitters, and welders. And this is also why in the minimum foundation program there are specific lines in the budget to pay for students to go to community colleges or ABC programs or coding boot camps, so that we will encourage kids to get out and do those more professional environments. It's also why the career diploma that was passed by then Representative Fannin 10 years ago included a space for a career major, so a student can take 9 courses to contribute to that. If I have a concern about career education, it's that too few kids are doing that, and we still have too many old school business type courses being taught back at the high school. And we've got to get our kids more in the industrial environment. And frankly, we've got to look back at the union apprentice models and try to replicate a lot of what they used to be done. Lanny?
There is some national debate about the rigor of the industry credentials. There's some fear that they have been watered down because of popularity. Do you feel that there is that the industry credential that was stiff enough several years ago is still legitimate today?
I think the people you have to ask on that are the employers, and it's why the Workforce Investment Council, which is a legislatively created body overseen by the Workforce Commission, created the the IBC, Industry-Based Credential Task Force. And they're the ones that approve any credential that goes into our system. I think we need to stiffen those requirements up and go back to them and ask them to just continually do a vetting. And I think we are at a place as a country where the answer to your question largely is no. And so when we rely on employers, we get a better answer. But would I like to see a more consistent set of credentials nationally? Definitely. The challenge comes in industries that are changing so fast that creating credentials appears counterintuitive to the employer. For example, in the craft trades, you can have a stable electrical credentialing series that in 2010 is going to be relatively consistent with what it needs to be in 2020. But in transportation and logistics, in advanced manufacturing, those credentialing series have proven more elusive because the role of machines, for example, has changed and data has changed so much. So I think that the largest employers in the country, the Amazons and the Walmarts and such, need to get involved in creating more stable credentialing series. It's an issue of opportunity for kids pursuing these jobs.